Well, thank you, folks. Everybody click the got it button. So thank you all for joining us here. As Bill said, Ron Benedict, a former volunteer member of College Park Fire Department, which a lot of people recognize. We have a lot of folks come out of that department with national programs, including Steve Kerber's, probably one of our more renowned members, doing all the research stuff. He was actually my roommate, so you can tell which one of us got the brains and which one of us just has to do the grunt work. So that being said, I came out of fire service, took a job at the IFF. I was there for the better part of 20 years. The last 8 or 10 years I spent in the grants department, building their department. Basically, my job was to help fire departments apply to the AFG and SAFER grants. So any department across the US that was on a career side was my responsibility to shepherd them through the process. Some of them needed a little bit more help in the writing end. Some of them needed just a little bit of review services. Some of them really didn't need too much at all. But overall, over the 10 years there, we did roughly 700 million in grants, give or take. Probably closer to 750 by the time we left. In between there, I also worked for a private grant writing company who started off with a big heart. They were based in Silicon Valley. They were doing all the right things and helping fire departments. And a woman who started it was really passionate about it. However, once the Silicon Valley money got a hold of things, they started just driving people into contracts. And the whole thought process went from let's find departments money to let's get departments under a contract, and then we'll go worry about what kind of grant we could chase down. So I wanted to do things a little differently. My whole thing was I always wanted to have a seat at the kitchen table. So whenever we go, when we travel across the US, my wife and I, we always like to stop in the fire departments we've got money for and see the folks there. And that's my whole goal, is to not just take departments' money, because a lot of these folks are out there doing bake sales and wearing 15, 20-year-old gear. And if there's not a really good chance that we're going to get them a grant, we're not going to take their money. So I decided to spin off my own company called Fire Grants Expert. Had a couple of writers and a couple of the front office staff had said to me, if you ever decide to do your own thing, we're going to come with you. And of course, a lot of people say that and don't always follow through. But certainly when I started the business, I had 2 of the front end folks come over and help me, Ashley and Audra. So they do a lot of our data entry and application building. And we have 4 writers that work for us who were all either current or retired firefighters. So everybody has a hand in a pot still. We know what we're talking about when we're writing the grants. We're all operational in some form or fashion. And we've gotten a lot of success. Lately, our success rate is about 70% on AFG. Same right now for SAFER. Kind of depends on what you're looking for. Apparatus and things like that are really, really hard to get. SCBA and turnout is much, much easier to get. So it kind of depends on the project, but we'll give you a really good idea of what your odds are. And what we also like to do is look at the capital improvement budgets. And sometimes chief will say, well, I'm going to buy this next year. And then, 2 years after that, I have this to buy. And what we can do is say, well, the odds of getting a grant for item A may be really good if you wait another year or two, versus this other item here you're trying to get for a grant, keep getting turned down, and you don't know why, but you're never going to get a grant for that for whatever reason. Having the experience I have over the past couple of years, we kind of know the priorities of the projects, how things are scored, and the realities. Going back to apparatus, everybody wants shiny new red fire trucks, and actually roughly half of the requests, when you look at the actual money requested, are for apparatus, but the average age of award for apparatus for a volunteer department is somewhere around 25 to 28 years. So there's a lot of folks who, they call and say, oh, I got a 15-year-old fire truck. It's not great condition. NFPA says I should retire it. So NFPA is loaded with a bunch of manufacturers committee. Your engine's probably perfectly fine for the 150 calls a year you're running it. And somebody else has told them that you get a grant for it. And we're honest with them, like, look, I'm not going to take your money for it. You're never going to get this. You're not going to get it now. You're not going to get it 5 years from now. Now, if your engine is 25 years old and has a bunch of decrepit pieces on it, it's falling apart and dropping to trans, the electrical is dropping out, then we'll talk. And so that's what we do with all our projects. Somebody said the other day, well, you kind of cherry pick. And I said, no, we don't cherry pick. Cherry pick would be going around and just taking only select projects for people who are going to pay you a certain amount of money. What we want to do is give people their best chance of success. So been very happy with the way things have turned out for me and for actually all of our folks. It's a part-time business. All of our, like I said, the writers are all career firefighters. Some of them are battalion chiefs out in Orange County, and they make plenty of money on overtime. So the little grant writing money that I pay them on the side is not really enough motivation. They're really doing it because they love it. And the same thing for me. I work full-time in emergency management. planning, training exercises. This is just something we do at night on the weekends. We get really busy for a couple of months every year, do a bunch of grants, and then hopefully 3 or 4 months after we submit, all the fire departments start calling us and telling us how happy they are because they all got funded. So with that being said, one, I'll ask if there's any questions, and two, if there are particular projects you're looking for on the grant side. I know when I talked to Chief Killen, we were looking at, let's see here, we had some ADA compliance issues at the firehouse. There was some apparatus issues, the SCBA units we were looking at. There was a question about apparatus, and there was a standard of coverage for, we talked about that for the SAFER grant, and marketing and education materials. So I guess I'll open up the questions first, and then we'll kind of go through.
Don, go ahead. You had a question.
So Ron, you said 25-year-old trucks. We've got trucks that are 40 years old. Okay. So that leads me to believe that we would qualify for, I would say, roughly 25 to 40% of our trucks to be replaced, meeting just some of the criteria you spoke of. Also, hazmat, and understand that we're an association. We just try to help these guys out who are the chiefs and provide things for them, get information, do the work, whatever. But the hazmat team, is there any special grants under the hazmat consortiums in the country? Are we still going back to SAFER grants and being pretty dependent on FEMA for any type of grant?
So yeah, as far as the grants go, they are somewhat limited in scope. So things like hazmat are a medium priority. And unless your call volume is extremely high, FEMA doesn't generally get to the medium priority projects. There are some smaller grants out there through insurance companies and stuff like that that offer smaller amounts. However, those typically aren't geared to hazmat either. So unfortunately, hazmat is kind of like the orphan stepchild and does not get funded all that regularly.
Understood.
That might be a question where, if we have $100,000 in the budget and we know we need more hazmat stuff, there may be items in there I can get you through AFG, and then you can use that extra money that you have left that you'd have to buy these other items and fund your hazmat department.
Okay.
The other question for apparatus. So apparatus has to be old, but there's also the way the FEMA scoring system looks at it. It says how many apparatus do you have, and then it groups the apparatus into types. So by engine, tanker, brush truck, aerial. But then it also looks at number of stations you have. And so if you have 1 or 2 stations and you have, say, 3 engines or 4 engines, we'll say 2 engines in each station, and your frontline engine is, 5 to 8 years old, and then your second due engine is 30 years old, the apparatus score is not going to turn out that well, because the whole goal behind the grant is to make sure that everybody has the minimum required to do their daily operational mission. So the computer looks at that and it says, well, you have 2 perfectly good engines. Understand you may like another engine behind that. However, this other department behind you that's also applying for grant doesn't even have 1 good first due engine. And so you tend to not score as well when you're doing that, unless you can really justify that in your narrative. But it's hard because the front end of the application is what we call the data side. And that looks at your inventory of whatever it is you're asking for, whether it's equipment or apparatus. It also looks at your population, call volume, and then it ties the call volume into whatever you're asking for. So if it's hazmat equipment, it looks for your hazmat call volume. If it's extrication equipment, looks at your extrication call volume. And then that whole data score thing gives you a 50% of your overall score. So in some cases, departments don't even score well enough coming out of the computer score to make it to narrative review. And as beautiful as your narrative is and as many hours as you spent writing on it, nobody ever gets to read it because the computer kicks you out in the first round.
Makes sense. Now, the one thing that's going to hurt us is response. We have few hazmat responses. Size of the county, the median income here is $23,000 a year. So the other that we've looked at and we haven't pursued are local grants from our banks and some of our business, Kiwanis Club, Roatan, and those. Have y'all had any experience in doing those? And If so, how did you manage those and what would that be costing us?
Yeah, I'll be honest with you, some of those smaller grants, it's very much who you know and a more of a political relationship. And it probably doesn't pay you to get a grant writer involved. In some cases, if we've done an AFG grant, we can extract some of the language from there for financial need and department overview and stuff like that. A lot of times the Kiwanis are like a 2-page application, and the first part of it is really just giving them contact information. So once we get you one grant built out, in many cases, you guys can just kind of fill those out yourselves and throw applications in as the formality behind the actual process. If it's something more than that, feel free, you can share them with us. But we've generally found that it doesn't pay a whole lot to have grant writers go after those because it just gets expensive on the associations.
Ron, I don't know
I'm
if
not trying to take it over here, but there again, I'm making these notes, trying to move along in case I get jerked out of here. Training in high school programs. We got our separate training here that we need to really have and make inviting. And then we have a couple of programs going on in our high schools. Is there anything to help pull that or pull that money in? I know that Debbie may have some questions there in regards to the schools also.
Yeah, there is under the SAFER recruitment and retention part of the program. So SAFER has two parts. One is the career side to hire career personnel, and the other side is to help volunteers with recruitment and retention. There is something for a cadet program under there and a outreach/marketing program. So that's something we could look at and see exactly what the parameters are there and how much money you're looking for and submit something like that. Particularly if it's paired with some of the other high priority items, we could be successful there.
Good, thank you. Go ahead, Bill.
We have currently ongoing in the 2 high schools a fire science program, and neither of them will reach the firefighter 1 threshold in a year. They have 2 retired firefighters teaching that program, and it seems to be taking off pretty well. Would that be something that the school would have to apply for? And can the high school or the school system apply for a SAFER grant for that program? Or would that be something that the association would have to do? How would we work that when the school is doing the process and we're supporting it? And Debbie, jump in here if need be. And also Chief Fugit and Jason Merle, don't hesitate to jump in if you have something. And I'm not sure who is in on the iPhone. It doesn't show an identification, but don't hesitate to jump in.
So as far
at our high schools, as they said, this is a new technical program that started this year. So, and like he said, we do have 2 retired firefighters that are teaching this. So we're kind of starting at the ground floor, and you know, we could use just about anything. So, you know, if the schools would be eligible to apply for something like that, we would be certainly interested in doing whatever we could to help get that program fully off the ground.
Yeah, so the SAFER grant's interesting because you can apply as an interest organization. However,
As a what? I'm sorry.
As a interest organization.
Okay.
So the group we have here tonight, as representatives of those departments in the county here, could apply because they are the interest organization representing those departments. But
Okay.
I don't think they extend that to schools. The other thing is it's not going to fully fund your department. It may give you a little extra funding for marketing materials and outreach and help you build some of the programs specifically with regards to how those folks in the program are coming out and becoming volunteers in the fire department, as opposed to getting classes in fire science. And there's I guess a differentiation there between, do I come out of this with a degree, or am I somebody who is now riding the fire truck? Now we would have to flush it out a little bit. I haven't done one yet where it's a school that is sort of the backing program, but I can read through the language and see if anything is available online from some of the other folks who are also grant writers in the space, and if any of them have done something similar.
Okay.
And I should say one note of differentiation too, while we're on the subject of interest organizations like this group here, So for SAFER, you are allowed to apply as a group. However, under AFG, it actually has to be the fire department of record. So you would actually have to have one of the 8 or 9 departments serve as what we call the host organization. And they would apply. All the other departments, we have a data online Google sheet where everybody puts your data in there. And then all those regional departments have to sign an MOU, and that goes into the application as well. And that is the way you would have to do it for anything regionally on the AFG side. So anything non-personnel would have to go through one host department, and all the other departments would just be signing on to that. As a host department, that means you are responsible for the progress reports and the financial drawdowns. So if there's anyone who has like a grants department or a finance administration folks in their department there, part-time, career staff or FTEs, that would definitely probably be the way to go.
Okay.
Are there any requirements for matching funds for any of these grants, Ron?
Yes, for the AFG program, it's a 5% match if you're under 20,000 and a 10% match if you're over 20,000 up to $1 million. Once you get above $1 million, it's 15%, but that's only AFG. SAFER doesn't have any matching requirements for the recruitment and retention side. If you're looking to hire people, there is a cost match. And we don't know what that looks like this year, but I don't think y'all are looking to hire people, so I don't think we need to go into too much detail there.
I don't know how much background about the county I gave you, Ron. We are 500 square miles, population less than 60,000. We have 8 all volunteer fire departments. And back in the early 2000s, 7 of the 8 fire departments obtained an AFG grant for an apparatus. And that's probably why there hasn't been any success recently in getting an apparatus, because that apparatus we got back in the early 2000s sort of changed that factor on the average age of the vehicles. We have approximately 173 people that are covered under workers' compensation insurance. It gives you an idea of the number of people we have in the organization here. We're 8 independent volunteer fire departments, an independent hazmat emergency response team, and the chief of that group has joined us, John Murnane. And then there are 4 municipalities that have volunteer fire departments that are staffed with police officers and public works personnel. We don't have any single countywide organization or entity other than the association, and the association apparently does not qualify for AFG. And it appears that we would be on the edge or the margin trying to do something under SAFER.
So if you were to go strictly through for that school program, I think there's a way we could do it. It's just a matter of how we have to massage it through. And then what do we build into that as your budget? But I think it can be done. The AFG, I would say, a lot of times the associations get together, they kind of act as a steering committee, and they go down to the rank and file fire chiefs and say, hey, look, we'll help get all the information all together. We'll fill out the forms. We'll take the paperwork burden off. But then you just have to be the actual application or applique. And in many cases, the sell to the fire department then is, look, we're taking all the work, and in return, you will get X, Y, and Z equipment. And that is often a fairly easy sell to a chief that's on the hook for replacing, 175 SCBA units. Well, that'd be a very big department. But even 20 SCBA units at $6,000 a piece, there's a hefty price tag there. So everybody looks at apparatus as, like I said, it's a big red shiny fire truck. Everybody gets distracted by that driving down the street, but there's hose and appliances and radios and turnouts and gear washers and dryers and exhaust systems in the station and everything else under the sun you can think about that you're buying out of your daily budget. And we have to watch, because I generally don't recommend putting in for things like hand tools, but what about battery powered extrication equipment and all the other stuff you need to do the daily activities. So don't overlook all that, just try to focus on the super big items.
Okay. Chief Fugit, your organization has been successful a number of times on grants. Want to jump in here?
Well, Bill, we did early on when the AFG program first started. Actually, the first one we were successful on, it was a paper process. They didn't even have it online. You filled out the paper application. But yeah, we've been quite successful. I think, if I'm not mistaken, we secured like 6 out of 8 that we applied for. Training, we secured about 13,000 for training on the first one we got. We did get an apparatus, PPE on one, turnout gear, SCBAs. We did apply for a fire prevention grant. That's where we got the trailer, which is not a matching. We didn't have to match anything on that one. On the apparatus, we had to match 10%. But yeah, we've been pretty successful. The last one we applied for, we knew that we were going for broke, so to speak, and applied for an apparatus, knowing that we would probably rate somewhere medium, and it'd probably get kicked out by the computer, and we wouldn't even get wouldn't even get a review. And that's the only reason we've not applied recently. Because, well, number one, I've lost one of my partners as far as the grant writers, Jesse Bishop. He and I worked diligently on the grant when we were applying for them. But it takes a little bit of time, legwork, dotting the I's, crossing the T's. But yeah, we've been pretty successful.
That's good. Yeah, I remember the old paper applications. FEMA has generally tried to make the system more firefighter friendly, knowing that a lot of folks who are signing these are on light duty or volunteers who are, hey, I found out this grant process, let me go write a grant, and don't realize how involved it is. And it's also gotten harder. It used to be a little bit easier to go through and get things. And I think FEMA's kind of tightened up a lot of the questions, because a lot of people were saying, well, the department up the street from me got apparatus and they already have a nice new engine. And there's always cases where people, I don't want to say they lie, but they stretch the truth on some applications. And there was fire chiefs taking gear off the rack and saying, oh, we don't actually own this gear. And so they've gotten to the point now where this year, they separated out the AFG for the turnouts and the SCBA. And there was, when you had to rank your stuff, it was, is it actually out of service or is it just getting old? Because everybody was saying, oh, well, my stuff's 12 years old and I can't use my, I was like, well, yeah, you can use your SCBA still. It's not a 10-year recommended mark, but it's perfectly useful. So they broke that out now and said, well, tell me how many of them you actually have out of service for repairs. And then when you went through and did that, they actually had one of their tech reps call you and say, we're just calling to confirm under oath that you have this number of SCBA units out of service. Because people were playing a game and they were, oh yeah, the regulator's out of service. Go put 5 of those out of service. I'm going to hit submit on this grant, and then put them back on a rig after I submit. But at the time I submitted the grant, the SCBA was not in service, wink, wink. So FEMA's gotten pretty attuned to all the different ways people play the game. And even on they now have what's called a micro grant category, which is $50,000 federal share or less. And some of the big departments started saying, well, you know what, this could be our gear replacement program. So places like Philadelphia would go through every year, put in for $50,000 for a turnout replacement. And because of their call volume and population, they would get it all the time. And so FEMA said, well, now we're going to start penalizing it. If you keep on putting in for microgrants every year, you're going to get like a -2 points, which is often enough that you don't get the grant from year to year. So they have their little nuances in there. But yeah, if you've been successful in the past, certainly you could be successful today. You just got to check the right boxes, sometimes get the FEMA help desk to give you a call and explain why you're checking things certain ways. But often it's a matter of, how do I package this? How do I take the narrative? The narrative is now parsed out a little bit more. The finance section asks for a little bit more detail. So it's not rocket science. It's just keeping a reviewer on your side, moving them through the application so that they're looking at their scoring sheet. And the next thing on the scoring sheet is the very next thing you say in the application. And if you can make their life easy, keeping in mind that the reviewers are reading grants for 6-8 hours a day from Monday to Friday, by the time they get to Thursday afternoon, they really don't want to hear anything else. They just want you to put a nice clean request in front of them. You help me get to yes, score your grant, let me move to the next 30 applications I have to read before this process is over. And that's really what we specialize in, putting a request and it'll get through that computer score to get you in front of a peer reviewers, answering all the questions that are in the grant application, but also all the questions that they're going to ask that we know, having been reviewers, are going to come that aren't necessarily in the application, but that they're thinking in the back of their head.
Ron, we have joined our group is Chief John Murnane. He's one of the retired career firefighters who's teaching at Volunteer High School in the fire science program. He's also chief of the hazardous materials emergency response team. And John, I don't know how much of the conversation you heard about the discussion on hazmat vehicles, but John, tell us how much of it you heard, and if necessary, we'll get Ron to go back over that.
Well, I got in right when you were talking about the hazmat. I think I missed the first part of it. But Ron, I'm new to this hazmat team, and we need a lot of work. We need a lot of equipment, and we've applied for a couple small grants. We've got a railroad grant through the railroad for $2,500, and we're buying some monitoring equipment, and we've got a training grant through the state of Tennessee for about $3,500 that we just received, and we're looking to see what we can do and what's out there and what's available to us, because us being a standalone hazmat team, there's a lot of these applications we come across and they want the FDID number. So, and that's something that we're working on through the state of Tennessee, is to be recognized as a fire department, because they do have a hazmat team in the state of Tennessee that's recognized, and some EMAs. So that's something we're looking at, and I've talked to the state about it, and they said if the county would give our blessing that we provide the service to the county and we support the fire departments and what we do, they would give us an FDID number, and just another step, just another thing to keep us accountable. So that's kind of what we're looking at, just trying to figure out where we need to go as this kind of team.
So one of the problems you're going to run in with the FDID number is it requires you to list all your call volume for the prior 3 years. And if you apply just from a hazmat department aspect, then you wouldn't have call volume for 2 years, which is going to draw your score down.
Right.
So I would say if you're looking at doing anything really for a department of your size with a call volume and a population spread out, going regional is the way to go. And once you get everybody's information and you see the process of getting all the information in, like I said, we use a live Google sheet, which, if you guys don't hire us, you can also set something up very easily where you just go through and say, hey, everybody dump your data in here. And then every time you want to go apply for a grant, you just update that year's call volume and, some financial information. It becomes, I would say, a routine process, but it's much harder to set it up the first time and go through and get your SAM registration and a DUNS number and a FEMA Goes account. And that's why we have a specialist in the front office that does that for us, because departments just don't have the time to do it nowadays. Not everybody has an association of 8 folks who want to be involved in some form or fashion. They're a fire chief who's struggling to do everything else he has to do, and now he also is trying to write a grant. So they hire us, and we nuts to bolts put the application in for them. So there's always options. Like I said, it's how you package it. So with the hazmat scenario, the hazmat equipment is, generally speaking, a medium priority. Unfortunately, FEMA, since the actual request, they only get satisfied about 15 to 20% of the overall requests coming in each year. So roughly 75 to 80% of the people go home empty-handed. So you start looking at the high priority projects versus medium priority projects. Unless you have a really high call volume and a large population, generally speaking, medium priority projects and hazmat equipment do not get funded. Now there's a chance, but I wouldn't take your money. And to give you guys an idea, roughly AFG and SAFER grants are about $3,500 each, give or take. So I probably wouldn't say that would be the best use of your money.
Right. Okay.
Now I should also say too, if we are successful, FEMA reimburses $1,500 of that grant writing fee. So it's $2,000 out of pocket. So if we're getting you a $20,000 grant or $25,000 grant with a really good chance of success, then it's probably worth spending that money to chase it. But if you're not going to have a really good chance there, then then I would say just skip over as you found with the last round of apparatus there.
Right. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah, and I know, John, you came on a little bit late. When I sort of said our introduction, we all do this part-time as a labor of love. I have a couple active duty guys who could get overtime very easily, make a lot more money than we pay them to write the grant. But they do this because they really enjoy it. They want to help other departments out. And it's our sort of way of giving back to the fire service. So I want to make sure that if we're taking money from somebody who's doing bake sales and everything else, that the chances of success are there and quantifiable.
Right. Right. Yeah, we're just like I said, we're to the point, we're just trying to figure out, with the county funding, we get $19,000 a year from them. And, we're at the point now where we've got a 38-year-old truck and a 26-year-old truck, I believe. And it's an everyday issue of one breaking down, running calls, so just trying to figure out where do we go from here? You know what I mean?
So if you can get me a list of your fleet, then that would be the best way to go. So all I really need, I don't need, the actual type and the model. I just need, is it an engine, a tanker, aerial, brush truck, or ambulance, and the year of manufacture. And we can flush that out and see another scoring point for FEMA is the average age of your fleet, and then the fleet that you're requesting. So if you're requesting an engine, it looks just at your group of engines. So we can look at that in a little bit more detail and see, is there a chance here? Is it a definite no-go? Is there a chance if you apply as a regional, or if nobody requires you to have all 8 departments. So if there is one department that has a nice new engine and you leave that department out of the application and do a regional application with 7 departments, then you may find yourself scoring better. So again, going back to that, how do I package this to make it more palatable and get past that computer score?
Oh, yes. Right. Makes sense.
And I got, this year we put in, I think 5 or 6 apparatus requests, and none of them were funded. And if you read through their grant, you would swear that you would take money out of your own pocket to give these guys an engine. That's how bad off they were. However, they all got knocked out in the computer score because they weren't quite old enough, or the call volume wasn't quite high enough, et cetera, et cetera. So tough. Unfortunate.
John,
they were good applications.
And I think our call volume will hurt us too, of course. And we're working on that to actually get our call volume up, because I think there's more things that we could be dispatched on and run to increase our call volume.
Yeah, it's like catch-22. You don't want to be boring everybody running every single medical call just to attach yourself to calls.
Right.
But that also handicaps you in some of the grants. What is the call volume, roughly speaking, across the county?
On the hazmat calls, we're probably around 15 a year. May average 1 a month. We've had 3 in the last couple weeks. So it's, we don't have a high call volume,
Yeah. So again, if you went with a regional application, that might be something where you could get something. But it'd be a tough sell. So I would recommend saying, what else do we need across the county, and maybe look at some other items.
Right.
hey, John, this would be the perfect, and I say perfect, that study we said started and was working on, this would be some of the best information that we could have collected right now to use with Ron to go for these grants, because we would have all the individual station or department information. And like you said, we could take those that are in the worst need, put them first, and probably have a better chance of success. Just like, and I didn't see your name in, I asked a question about hazmat, what was out there that we could do. So just trying to look out for you.
Well,
And
I do appreciate that.
Well, the thing is, we're all in this together, man. And
Right.
when it comes down to it, if we're not looking out for one another, something's wrong.
So now the only hazmat thing I can get you, and I'm just looking through the guidance document here. So hazmat training and this is FEMA's infinite wisdom here. Hazmat operations, so the 472 training is actually a high priority. So if you need to send people through training, that hazmat technician, then we could apply for something like that. But then when I go down to look at all the response equipment, it's all medium priority. And I don't think with your call volume that you would meet the requirements to get funded under that.
Well, how would we fall as far as, most of your hazmat teams, are under in a fire department. It's a city or whatever. But where our hazmat team is all volunteer, we're essentially an island on our own, like the volunteer departments. We are not under anybody, but where do we I guess I've kind of asked that question, is where do we fall? Because we really don't answer to anybody. We're kind of out here in limbo. And when we apply for grants or whatever, it's not like we're we're not like we're a fire department, we're a hazmat team.
So
Redheaded
that's
stepchild.
yes.
What's
So
that?
that's kind of a question that you all have to handle with the authorities having jurisdictions and stuff like that. But as far as the grant goes, it's not necessarily your department versus another department. It's simply that FEMA doesn't consider hazmat equipment to be a priority right now. And the reason for that is because 99.5% of the calls are not hazmat related, and they've chosen to direct the pot of money they have to other items that are all high priority items. And FEMA doesn't make that decision unilaterally. There is a group, they call it the Nine Sisters Organization, the IFC, the IFF, the training coordinators, all those folks get together in a room and they say, what items do we want to move up in priority? So recently it's been a lot of cancer focused. So washers and dryers and the extraction systems and stuff like that have all been moved up to high priority, as well as cancer research and those type of things. After 9/11, hazmat was a huge priority, but now that's been moved down since probably 2007, 2008, because they realized we were spending a tremendous amount of money on this stuff and the impact on daily operations just wasn't there. So they refocused things. So you may find in a couple of years again, if some other event pops up, just like COVID popped up and all the public health money went to COVID now. So, give it a couple of years and next thing you know, we'll be on to the next, disease of the day.
Ron, I hate to bring this up because it's been a bone of contention. The county mayor asked a member of his staff to look at the idea of consolidating all the departments into a single county department. That's been discussed by members of the association. How would it appear or be if it was a countywide volunteer single organization as opposed to the 8 individual fragmented groups?
So if you did a regional application, I don't see that there would really be any difference in the scoring, because either way, you're going to have the same call volume, the same population, the same number of members. What I would say is if you're looking at doing something like that, you can apply under the SAFER grant for what's called like the standards of coverage document or a staffing needs analysis. So you could have an outside consultant come in that maybe you hired through the association and therefore retain sort of voting rights over, and have them come in and do a full-fledged study, and that would be paid for from the SAFER grant. And they would go into, is it the way to go completely all volunteer into one system? Is it a combination system where we have paid daytime staffing? Do our volunteers have the training and the equipment they need? And that kind of gives you a lot of political cover to go back to the authorities and say, hey, look, we either need our budgets increased, or we need staffing here, or here it is from an unbiased source of what our needs are over the next 5-10 years, and then build that capital budget.
We had a group of fire personnel, an ad hoc group, started a study, and then we made it a function of the association, and we're sort of at a stagnant point right now, and hopefully we'll get back on that. But that report would have been a very comprehensive report that would have served a number of purposes, would have been a great tool for grant applications, also for informing and educating the county government. The county government this year gave $240,000 to the 8 fire departments, which is not a lot of money. It really is this is an at-risk county. There are 10 distressed counties in the state. And that brings into a lot of factors based on income and a number of other factors. And our EMS director had to drop off because of call volume load, and he had to go respond. But I know that Don had an EMS question up there, but he's gone at this point. I'm going to stop for a minute, and I know Debbie's been listening a lot. Debbie, I don't know if you've got anything else that you might add to this discussion at this point.
One thing that I was curious about is the one thing that we're looking at is grant funding for safer schools. Different kind of doors, cameras, things of that nature. Is there anything like that available on the SAFER grants, or is it strictly for more toward fire departments and things of that nature?
Yeah, that's only fire departments.
Okay.
But I am a member of the National Grants Management Association and the Grants Professionals Association. I don't know, Debbie, if you're a member of either of those.
No, not yet.
Okay,
I've got
so
a pretty limited budget.
So I would highly recommend, I think the GPA membership is $200 a year. And there are different groups in there, including a group for school funding, healthcare funding. And there's a discussion forum board on there you can have access to as a member. And there's a ton of information on there for different funding. And also if you have questions, you can post them to the group for, hey, I'm stuck on this part of an application, or what does this mean? And there are a bunch of people typically will jump in and help you out with that. There's also a conference every year that has breakout groups and a number of different presentations. So if you can figure out a way to finagle that into your budget, then I would recommend doing so.
Okay, thank you.
Certainly. And as far as, I know you said there was going to be an EMS question. So EMS stuff is often a high priority, including monitors, defibrillators, all sorts of, power cots and stuff like that, I think are still a high priority. So there's a lot of EMS equipment you can get. Your call volume doesn't have to be huge, but again, it is a factor in all the scoring, but also the age of the equipment. So if you have LifePak 12s and they're coming out the 20s next year, and your stuff is old and broken and no longer manufacturer supported, then that's probably something you could apply for with a decent chance of success.
That brings me to a question. We have an EMS agency that evolved from a volunteer rescue squad. And Tony, you and John might be able to pitch in here if I miss something, but they have a board of directors. They're a 501c3 nonprofit, and they have full-time staff. I believe they have some part-time people who work. Would they be eligible to apply for AFG or SAFER grants?
They could apply under AFG. There is a specific set aside for EMS only agencies. However, I would still go the regional route and lump them in with all the fire departments. Because if you compete under the EMS only, there's a lot of agencies competing for a very limited pool of money. And I think a lot of those EMS agencies are probably going to have a higher call volume. Whereas if you go in under the fire side, you're competing for 90% of the money. And with all your call volumes combined, I think that would probably be the better way to go.
Okay.
So John, if we do obtain some EMS equipment through the fire grant, do we have to carry that on our fire trucks, or can we transfer it over to them to use?
So if you would apply from a regional perspective, you would have to have an MOU in there that kind of says how the equipment's going to be used. And FEMA's not going to come in and say, well, I want to see exactly where this is. They just want to know that this is the general plan for whatever it is that you requested.
Thank you.
Okay, we've been at this now a little over an hour, and I'm close to my recording time. And Debbie has dropped off. I'm going to come back. Tony, you have anything else, questions or comments you'd like to add before we proceed to end this session?
Well, Bill, and you know, you and I have talked about this, but just based on how we did on our last grant at Goshen Valley, and I really think our call volume had a big play in it. The population served had a big play in it. And what we were requesting, you know, we'd gotten a new truck. That truck was a 2006. So, and we did receive a letter from the department telling us where we were weak and where we were strong. And that's what, that was what we come up with. We just didn't make it through the computer kicked us out. We didn't make it to the peer review. These grants are much more competitive now than what they were when we were successful. I think the approach for the county, we need to come together, some kind of a consensus, and apply for a regional grant. Our call volume, based on the 8 departments, you're probably looking at a call volume of somewhere around 1,000 calls a year, or a little better. Population hovering right at 60,000 for the county. I think we'd have a better chance of securing a grant if it was a regional grant as opposed to an individual department.
Okay. Chief John?
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to understand it. The regional grant would be where we're just going together and applying as a group, right? Be like the fire departments, and would the hazmat just kind of tag along with that group?
Yes, yeah, exactly. For all intents and purposes, you're just another fire department providing services, or another agency providing scope of services as defined under the grant.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Don?
Ron, what little you know about us right now, what would you consider to be our next step after we hang up here? And what grant do you feel that we would be most capable of obtaining?
Well, the AFG opens November 8th or 15th, so that's sort of the immediate priority. We thought it was going to be opposite SAFER, or FEMA was telling us SAFER was going to open first, but then they went, because they can't nail down the specifics with the political stuff on the SAFER grant, they decided to open AFG. With that being said, depending upon the motivation of the folks there and whether or not they can get all the information completed on our worksheet, we certainly have time to do an AFG grant. But the question is, what would the project be? And so I think as an association, you all need to figure out what are the most pressing needs for not just a single department, but for all 8 departments. And maybe there's 1 or 2 or 3 things that are kind of the high priorities. And then we need to look at, you know, what is the inventory of things you have for whatever you're requesting. So if it's extrication equipment, let's look at what do we have currently across the 8 departments. If it's turnout gear, who is missing turnout gear? What kind of turnout gear do we need? And kind of parse things out and say, which one of these is going to score best in the application. There's a chance that you can actually have 2 separate regional applications depending upon your needs, because if one fire department hosts one regional application, another fire department can host another regional application of not the same project, but all the same project partners. So if one department wanted to be the lead for radios and another one wanted to be the lead for turnouts, you could certainly do that. I don't recommend it unless you have 2 really, really good projects, but there's a chance to do that. So again, it goes back to how are we going to package this? Or if there's one department of the 7 that's really well off, maybe you leave them off and we just don't tell the reviewers why we left them off. Because often it's just a matter of what I put in the grant as much as what I left out of the grant that is the key. Now, the flip side of that is if you're writing grants and you don't tell reviewers certain information that they're going to be looking for, firemen being firemen, they're going to assume you're not telling me for a reason, and you're either lying, or because if you told me the actual status of whatever it is, then you would get, docked a couple points for it. So I would say it's really on you guys to say, do we have the time and motivation to do this for this cycle? or is this something we're going to look at in fiscal year 22? The grant will probably come around next late spring, maybe early summer. So it just depends on your time frame. We can move through fairly quickly, jump through the hoops as long as you guys are ready to go.
Okay. Well, with that, I'm going to stop the recording.